All right, now welcome back to the soup, where conversations simmer, ideas blend, and every voice has flavor to the mix. I'm your host, Coach Rob, aka the Chef, and I'm joined by three amazing, admirable minds: Dr. J, Dr. Jennifer Montgomery, the godson, James Goodson, and the professor, Keon Lewis. Now, if you're joined us the last time, thank you for pulling up your chair again. And if this is your first time, hey, you do have a seat at the table. If you have listened to us on the last one and picking up on this, be sure to share it. We're on our YouTube channels. Make sure that you subscribe, leave a comment, and continue to share this as we continue to grow. So, welcome as you have a seat at our table. Today, we're diving into a heavy but important topic: childhood trauma. You're not a kid anymore. We're going to talk about how the experiences from our early years in childhood and trauma have shaped us into who we are today. And it will be a roundtable discussion as we are with our host and our guest. And we talk about those things that have affected us, have shaped us as we moved into this life. But childhood trauma is a deep, deep, say, situation. I almost call it a situation where a deep, deep situation. Again, I said it twice to where we'll go back and find out what it is that affected us during life. So I'm going to start with Doc J. Will you tell us what childhood trauma is? Is there a definition for it?
Well, first, let me start by saying that often when we think of trauma in general, we like to think of the big, huge events. So, in general, let's not think of trauma as a big event. It could be any kind of chronic stressor. So, neglect, bullying, poverty, any kind of lack. So, especially in childhood, you think of things like lack of having food, having resources, having housing, having clothing, anything that can cause stress to the brain, um, anything that could cause a child to think about when they're going to have their next meal, when they're going to be, how they're going to be able to get to school. Things that could affect their parents can affect them as well.
So, and passing that over to you, Professor Keon. So it's not just about neglect. It's not just about emotional abuse. There's a wide range of childhood trauma. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct, and definitely to piggyback on what Dr. Jen stated, it is a huge spectrum of how one measures what trauma is and the way it impacts us, right? And as with anything, and especially when it comes to the matters of one's mental health, it's very subjective. What may be traumatic to one in one capacity is going to be at a different level to someone else. The biggest thing that when we're having the conversation around, and especially when we're talking about our youth and the way it impacts our youth and their daily living, is really identifying that it happened, that it existed, and that it occurred. One of the things that I've always been in conversation with my colleagues, whether in the scope of public health or in mental health and suicide prevention, is the conversation around the normalization of trauma and what that looks like and what that sounds like, and making sure we get out of the conversation of just allowing it to just fester and just say, okay, well, that's just every day. And these things are not common. These experiences are not normal. And it doesn't have a normal impact on our youth and even with us as adults. And so it just really, it varies. It's very subjective. And the biggest thing is acknowledging that it occurred, but then most importantly, making sure that we follow up with that with support, but also active listening.
So as I take that, and I appreciate that, yeah, I'll pass this over to Jay Good. And he said a part of this is childhood trauma, not a kid anymore. And Jay Good, can you tell me how that part of not being a kid anymore and how that rolls over into affect us in our adulthood?
Hmm. Yeah. So what I had to realize is the part of not being a kid anymore messes you up a little bit only because there were a lot of things that I grew up thinking that were normal until I was able to have some adult conversations outside of my neighborhood, outside of my immediate friend group, just to kind of see how people are, because we're not monolithic, right? How are people growing up in other areas of the country? Things that, like, I've seen some things in the park growing up that I just thought was a normal way of growing up. And, speaking to some of my coworkers, realized that, hey, I may need to shut up before these people get rid of me in here. It just kind of all of the things. Am I freezing again?
No, huh?
Okay, my fault. Just all of the things that you look at. So, like I say, the normalization, you really have to figure out how does those things affect you. And then I think the other thing that we think about, especially as men or boys, growing up, a lot of times men can have experiences that we sometimes can just chalk up to, oh man, I was doing my thing, or and I think also women too, when you think about, women getting picked up in box Chevys from high schools, and certain things like that. Those are the things that not until you're an adult you really realize, hey man, I may have been taken advantage of in this situation. And that's not as cool as I really have believed it to be, or my immediate friend group tried to make that.
That makes a lot of sense, and in talking like the lasting impact of how, I guess, and I guess Doc J said it best, like it's not just what you think of the things that you went through, but growing up in the part where, my mother and father divorced when I was young. I was in like sixth grade and actually ended up failing the sixth grade. Now, I didn't know now I did get my bachelor's and my master's just in case, when y'all start listening to this later on, don't forget it. But still, it was the part of her telling me that, I didn't realize that maybe that affected that school year. I didn't know that that took a toll on me. I was just thinking, hey, you see it throughout your community. Like you said, Jay Good, it was normal, people separate, go their separate ways, and it be what it be. It was nothing crazy, abusive, or nothing like that. For my part, it just, they went their separate ways. And so I didn't understand what that was like being the oldest of three boys at the time, not knowing what was going on. So I didn't know how that affected me. But again, when I had failed the sixth grade, and the crazy part was, I don't say the crazy part, her way of talking to me after was, she went to the beach, just her and I. She took me and her, just her and I went to the beach. And it was the more so just to be able to talk to me on that trip all the way down there to let me know that, hey, this that has happened is not your fault. This is not because of you, even though I didn't think that it was. But you don't know what to think at the time. So I was dealing with all of those things, and I'm glad that my mother did, and you'll hear me refer to her a lot of what she taught me or told me. But her teaching me that at such a young age helped me process some things that could have taken over into the adulthood. And as we move into that lasting impact, and I want to talk to you all about how trauma shows up in adulthood between relationships, trust, self worth, the career. And any of you can just jump in with that, and just take how that trauma transitions into adulthood with those type of, just like I said, just a couple of things I mentioned of trusting, relationships, your career, and your self worth.
Yeah, Coach Rob, I think you hit the nail on the head with something that was very critical in your childhood that occurred in that moment, and the fact that you were pulled to the side, whether it was in that car ride, whenever you got back home, or in that personal time with your family, with your mother, and with others, in acknowledging the fact that yes, something occurred, you went through it, you experienced it, but this is not your fault. But to also acknowledge that you had the right to feel those emotions in that moment.
Uh,
And I think that's one of the biggest things that as we talk about, not being a kid anymore, is that you have a lot of adults who right now to this day never got a chance or the opportunity to have someone to pour into them like that in those moments. And their very character, the way they conduct themselves, their leadership styles, all of those things that you mentioned and how it translates to who they are today is a result of that because they didn't have that platform. They didn't have that outlet. They didn't have someone to say, hey, I get it. I understand. You have the right to be angry. You have the right to cry. It's okay to show these emotions. Just as our brother Jay Good stated, when we talk about us as men, growing up as men, hey, you're a big boy. Don't cry. Don't show tears. Don't show those emotions. Yet, when we're coming up, we want to have those opportunities to express that and to show that. And so that, in a lot of ways, translates into the way adults are and the way that we are, even ourselves. And so I think that plays a very critical role. And it just goes back to another point that Dr. Jen stated about, those resources and being able to immediately recognize that something traumatic occurred and being able to pour into a child or pour into someone who experienced that to let them know that It's okay for them not to be okay, but let's make sure that we give them the support and oftentimes the listening ear that they need.
And that's good. And somebody else want to add into that?
I'll go. Let me back up a little bit when you were talking about how it shows up in adulthood. I want to talk about the why it shows up in adulthood.
Okay.
And I don't want to eat up too much of the time, but I need to break it down just a little bit from a physiological standpoint. So with trauma, it can affect the brain development. It causes an emotional response because it's not just about the event that happened, it's what happens physically in the body and what it does to the body eventually. There's behavioral signs, therefore affecting the relationships that we have to ourselves as well as to others, right?
Hmm.
So there's actually a physiological change that happens in the brain. And the more that we experience that traumatic events, not just the physiological event or the that happens, but experiencing it within ourselves, thinking about it, thinking that it's happening again and again and again, the more brain changes we experience. So to make it simple for all of us, and this is how I explain it to also the teenagers, I call it the group chat within the brain. There's three pieces: the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. So the amygdala is the alarm system. And I had this chat with a bunch of girls, so excuse me for calling it the amygdala, that girl who's hyperactive. She's
Uh-huh.
frantic. She likes to go off and she needs to be calmed down, but she's the one that's going to sound the alarm and she's responsible for the stress. Hippocampus helps you to explain if it's you're in the past or if you're in the present. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for mood regulation. Now, the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex need to be able to communicate. The more trauma is introduced into the space, the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex can't communicate well. So they actually shrink. Physiologically, they shrink within our brains the more we have trauma responses and they separate. So over time, from childhood to adulthood, they grow apart in the brain. So if you don't have good coping skills, conversations like your mom had with you, understanding that it's not your fault, you are not your trauma, they grow further and further apart. So therefore, if you can imagine someone's brain who's been through a traumatic experiences over and over again without having positive reinforcement, this is how their hippocampus and their prefrontal cortex are trying to talk to each other, and the amygdala is just saying, hey, we're stressed out. So they're always in a mode of survival and thinking that the traumatic experience is present, even though it's not. So think about adulthood still thinking that they're in that experience of childhood. So their relationships are still stuck in that childhood traumatic experience. They're still in the past, trying to live actively in the present. It's impossible to live healthy in the present when they can't communicate.
Wow, that was powerful. That was powerful, and that leads into my next question of asking, like, how do we recognize the signs of someone that is still dealing with child? Not that you're, that everyone is going to be, you're not a clinical therapist, you're not certified in this, but being able to recognize that people are still dealing with some things from childhood trauma. And the reason I say that is often with dealing with adults, a lot of times you see certain things like looking for approval or looking for validation. They're looking for validation where they didn't get it from their parent, or or for someone maybe that they looked up to during their childhood where they weren't validated. It's like you're still seeking validation, and you're doing good. You may be doing good from what we see on the outside, but you're still dealing with those things that you were not valid, whatever that trauma that may have been caused from that relationship, from that parent when you were younger. What are some of those telltale signs? Because again, like I'm saying, this carries over into your relationships today. That carries over into your job today. That carries into your friendship with just a regular friend that you deal with on a regular basis.
Well, a lot of individuals, and let me preface this, although I'm a licensed clinical pharmacist as well as a clinical mental health counselor associate. I am not I'm not, trauma is not my wheelhouse, but it does fall into the other areas where I counsel clients. Um, you will see a lot of people dealing with anxiety, depression, difficulty with emotional regulation. Some people may experience aggression, issue with social anxiety issues. Um, some may go into areas of addiction potential as well. Um, and of course, that affects their relationships with others. So, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later when we're talking about the healing process, but it's important not only for individuals to not only talk about the trauma, but find ways to actually address the trauma in a way that they understand how it's physically affecting them within their body. Because talking about it can actually put them back in a space sometimes where they're really experiencing it real time, and they're not able to disengage from, they're not there physically in the past, but they're um, here in the present, away from the traumatic experience, and being able to find coping mechanisms to take them out of that traumatic experience, if that makes sense.
And Jay Good, tell me, man, when we start talking this, and you had mentioned about, they say, be a big boy, don't cry, or, they tell you to be tough, but now you're
Hmm.
talking coping and survival. As we move into that, but you and Professor Keon, talk about how the coping and survival, how that kicks in from what you've learned, and even though you may have not been, have been able to sit down with a therapist or go talk to that teacher or go talk to that pastor or talk to that mentor, how did those natural coping and survival skills kick into us to begin that we think that we're using basically to make it to who we are today?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So for me, one of the things that I did when we were going through the research, over the weekend, I found a couple tests, like some self-administered tests. I think it's one of them was a ACE test, like maybe 10 to 12 questions and some other that you go through and kind of just figure out, hey, did I have some trauma? I struggled with it a little bit because some of the things, again, is very subjective. Some of the things I don't know necessarily if those were particular traumas or triggers for me, but I know in how my coping mechanism shows up, a lot of times it's just keep going. Like, don't worry about what's happening. Keep going. All I know is go, through death, through anything. It's just, hey, let me keep going. Let me go accomplish something. Let me go, whether that be put another butt in the seat. I'm a recruiter by trade, whether that be fill a job or just something to kind of get that emotional, that high again, or what I call my touchdowns, are those daily touchdowns, and I got a score. And if I can accomplish something, then I can kind of continue to move forward. Now, I will say every once in a while, you'll find yourself, maybe in a late night, watching a movie or just something where you realize, man, I'm holding on by a thread, and that stuff will catch up with you, where you just kind of have a moment, man. You had that breakdown, and you need to take some time to process through those things. So I'm trying to do a lot better, and this is personal. So I'm trying to do a lot better of finding ways to communicate to myself, communicate to other people, and call those things out of, hey, I just need a moment. Do you mind if I, go in the garage and, just relax? And I typically will, have a cigar, or just watch a little TV, just to kind of give myself some space. So those are some of the things that been working through. But then also I realized, I think Dr. Jen brought this up, you realize when you see people respond in an aggressive manner, or if you see a parent in the principal's office that is just, I won't say losing it, but acting a little aggressively towards, it's realistically because somewhere those skills they never really got those skills to express themselves slowly, calmly, and get those things out. So I work with my son on these things of, hey, after you start yelling, I no longer hear anything you're saying, so I need you to process, through some of these things. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we've been working on together as well.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, and I definitely want to commend both of our phenomenal speakers on that and capturing it not only from the physiological and the clinical standpoint, but also from the personal and the transparency in that. And I definitely want to commend you, my brother Jay Good, in that. This is a process, right? It is not easy. It is something that impacts us all differently in how we were brought up and what we saw in our respective living environments, our schools, our college experiences, all those things shapes and mold us. And even for myself as a student researcher, one of the things, as Jay Good mentioned, that I was introduced to and learning about, especially from the scope of mental health and in being an advocate in this space, is about the ACEs questionnaire, right? And that this is a common questionnaire that is not only available to youth, but also to adults. And it looks at a variety of things from abuse to household dysfunction, neglect, all of these things. And although the score itself is not an ideal or perfect measure, but it is something that just kind of gives you some indication as to the level of trauma and the level of things that you may have experienced and how it could have an impact on you. And so even thinking about that and thinking about these different types of assessment tools that we utilize on a regular basis that we see getting done in and outside of our school systems, in the job, clinically, and et cetera, then we have to think about, as you asked Coach Rob about, how do we, what are the best practices, right? How do we deal with the impacts of this? How do we go through this? How do we express and go through these emotions? One of the most immediate things I can think of, even with my own personal experiences, oftentimes we replicate what we see others do around us, whether it's in our own family members, our cousins, our uncles, our mothers and fathers, guardians, our coaches, our teachers, educators, our mentors, whoever were those pivotal individuals in our lives. It is very easy for us to replicate what they did because we saw them do it. So hey, when I saw Coach go through this hard time, I'm gonna replicate what he did because I look up to him or her. I look up to them and I believe in who they are as individuals. So if I'm struggling, if I'm dealing with this, I'm gonna go exercise, or I'm gonna go read this book, or I'm just gonna, just keep it within because I don't want to give away too much, right? The whole expression, what happens in this house stays in this house type deal. So it's a lot of different ways that individuals, choose to manage and cope with it. But I think it's oftentimes a reflection of what we've seen, what we've learned from others in our own households and in our own communities. And in a way, we kind of develop our own sense of resiliency as a result of that. It may not necessarily be the most healthiest thing in the world, but oftentimes it is a reflection of that. And so I think as we become adults, as we grow older, and as we begin to educate ourselves more about the significance of trauma and how it's been with us through childhood or through our teenage years on up through that, we learn through these experiences. We learn through better education, through training on how to develop those better practices to address it.
And that's a good point. And those are all good points that you made. And so when we talked about okay, the survival part of it, right? So now, as a child, because you're saying not a kid anymore. So when you're going to use those survival skills when you were a child, maybe they, you see kids that maybe don't talk to other people, or they sit alone, or they have, like Dr. Jen said, you have a breakout in anger. Now, how do those survival skills that help them then now become a barrier for your growth now as an adult? Because it may work as a kid. You'd have to sit by yourself, or you walk off, or the anger part you snap out. Well, you're grown now. You can't be in it like Jay Good say. You're in the job. You can't just snap out and go off on other people. So I want to talk about how do you break down those barriers now that were survival skills then, as you become an adult now, that could have really affect and stunt your growth.
You know what? Hear you say that, and I don't know if everybody was a huge fan of it as I was, but The Wire. Remember The Wire? And
Hmm.
remember when it was about, I want to say maybe season 4, when they were talking about the youth and how they were becoming so advanced in the game and what they were seeing, out in the streets of Baltimore. And so there was a particular scene or an episode within that season where you had this clinical researcher, and he pulled, one of the corner boards, as they called it, in there, and it was just asking him these questions, and they just saw how volatile he was. And the former police officer was talking to me. He was like, "Listen, man, he's a little too advanced in this game for you to be able to coach him or to say that the decisions that he's making right now is going to have severe consequences. So if we're going to address these needs, or if we're going to address these concerns, whether we're talking about violence or talking about substance abuse, things of that nature, we're going to have to get to them sooner and earlier. We're going to have to address these needs as soon as possible. So to go to your point, it really speaks volume to the thing that you said that helped you most, right? You had someone, whether it was your mother, an adult, guardian, coach, whoever, that when you experienced it then, they were able to pull you to the side and pour into you, but also listen to you. And as you were going through those emotions and going through those dynamics. And so oftentimes when you see a lot of youth and a lot of individuals who have experienced these traumatic events, and now they're becoming adults, they've pretty much created their own identity, it can be extremely difficult to get through those barriers because they didn't have someone at that earlier stage that acknowledged that they were going through something traumatic and was pouring into them and giving them that support and that education that they needed when they needed it most.
That's current. Anybody else want to add to that before we
I'm
move on
glad.
to? Go ahead.
I'm glad that we have more avenues for young adults and adults like myself to be more expressive. So places to for adults to actually just play and have fun. We have adult museums. We have adult games. You can go to adult playrooms. This what is called like a smash house, so you could just go and just smash a car. You can go throw paint. You can write on the walls. Do graffiti. Places where you have adult coloring books. You have all these things that maybe even 10 years ago, 15 years ago didn't exist where you can kind of release and process your trauma, and it's not as cliche or taboo. Um, and it's okay because sometimes you just need to have a release. And I know we usually say exercise, and that's good too. Don't get me wrong, because trauma can definitely lead to some health problems. But I feel like when you and I were kids, play was fun, but we still as adults need to just get out and just play and de-stress and do things that are just um wouldn't be normal for us to do, to just release some of that inner workings of the stress that we have gone through. And I'm glad that we have those opportunities to do that, especially in our area. And it's not looked at as um I'll say corny.
Well, that's a great point there because we all know coming up in our communities where we've come from, if you talk therapists, if you talk therapists, you talk help, you talk going to this like, well, we're not crazy or something is going wrong or it's just because of this or that. Like we're not addressing the issue. And I think that it was looked upon a lot different than it is now. So now it's nothing to say that, oh, well, like you said, a person you may look up to or take a lot of advice from to find out, well, they have they may have a therapist or they may have a counselor or they go to therapy and talk to somebody or they go talk to somebody, whether it be a coach or whoever it be. So I think that now versus back then is not looked upon or it's not frowned upon in the community as saying there's something because we are quick in the community to say something wrong with them, something wrong with you, something
Yeah,
wrong with
that
them.
stigma is real.
Yeah.
And that is one of the worst things that we can do, and that's what causes you, like you said, Jay, good about. That's when you got to be tough, and you can't express. No, that hurt. I can be tough, but no, that hurt. That actually hurt. I'm actually,
Absolutely.
hurting from that, and we find so many ways to kind of throw that off to where it's like we deflect it. We deflect what's really going on with us. And as we move
Right.
into this other segment of healing and growth, talking about the hope and solutions, again, let's get into some things of giving hope, of giving the solutions, of dealing with I'm not a child anymore. You're not a kid anymore. And then you may have kids and how you're going to relate to your kids, whether it's your own kids or kids that you got to talk to, being able to also show that empathy and have that open door that we talk about now for them, because what they deal with is a lot different than what we deal with. I mean, we can say that, all they do is on the phone, they don't do this, but what they deal with is a whole lot worse and a whole lot faster between that phone and being validated or being liked. Dealing with that, then the childhood trauma ways could be more than, like we said, it's just the situation or the environment. They're in a different environment than we are. And they do used to say, well, you don't go down to their level. You to make them respect you and come. No, you will lose them. We will lose a young person at this age if we don't go try to meet them at the mid road or meet them at the halfway point to get some type of understanding of what they're dealing with. So I want to talk to you all about, what does the healing look like? What could healing look like as an adult, going from the childhood trauma to not being a kid anymore?
That's an excellent and a fair question, Coach. And I tell you, there is no perfect answer for it. A lot of it is going to be trial and error. A lot of it is going to be exploration. Um, and going back to your point about meeting not only our youth but adults where they are, is first establishing trust, as with all things, right? One of the things they always talk to us about in the scope of public health and in any capacity when it comes to the sense of community engagement is you got to have that trust partner first, whether it's the leader of the group, family member, a trusted influencer, whoever that individual may be, whether you're talking directly to the individual that went through the trauma or not, is figuring out what is that common ground that you both can find. And then from there, it is the listening, the act of listening to see, what the experience, what the dynamic is. And from there, you try to go and explore those very things that Dr. Jen was talking about, whether it's game night, scream room, exercise, run club, whatever that may be. Give and grant them the space to share what they would like to try versus just walking in there and saying that you have the solution. And you want to, yeah, I know you want to be encouraging, you want to be positive, but you also got to give them an opportunity to decide for themselves what they would like to explore, how, what are the things they would like to identify. But I would say the biggest thing is having a sense of community that is going to be very supportive, very encouraging, that is always going to be there as a listening ear, so that in the event of any type of potential crisis, they know that they have someone who's going to have their backs and not be judgmental.
Good point. Good point. Someone else add to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quick. I think for me, building community might be the most important thing that I've been able to do, over the last couple of years. Really giving an opportunity to just have a couple people to bounce some ideas off of. And then the other piece I would say is realizing your strengths, the things that you're good at, the things you're not, the things you need to kind of work on, and actually working on those things, and also figuring out ways to always put yourself in the best situation to focus on those strengths or allow those strengths to shine. That way you can continue to flourish. And it could be anything from, you may have a slight, learning disability or just anything that's like that, but like lean into what makes you special so you can be who you need to be for the world and for yourself realistically.
Okay, that's a good one. Dr. Jen, you have anything?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. We always use the word, a safe space, but especially when dealing with children and adults who have been through trauma, having a safe and positive community and safe and positive support systems is essential to the healing through trauma. So it's a good protective factor to have stable environments, safe and supportive friendships, and community to help individuals, because those individuals will help identify your strengths. They will help hold you accountable. They will help you when you have times of vulnerability. They will remind you that you are in a safe space, that you're not going through that situation again. They'll have resources for when you don't have the capability. to have your own resources, and help remind you that it doesn't define your future. Just because you've been through this incident is not who you are. You are not your traumatic event. And let me say that always remember that trauma isn't wasn't your responsibility, but the healing process is. So whatever you can do to continue to build those communities, find those safe spaces, find those people that are your allies, the more your healing process can grow and flourish. Absolutely.
Wow. So I guess that kind of brings it all back around to I guess, to the full circle, and getting ready to close this up because I was going to finish this up with asking, like, breaking the cycle. How do we break the cycle, the generational trauma, and how do we stop ourselves from passing it on? Because again, like you said, we're still dealing with some of it. How do you stop that from being passed on to your children, or to some children that you may be working with, or someone that looks up to you? Breaking that cycle. So all the things that you all just said, and we'll close on each one of you giving a point on that, on breaking that cycle of childhood trauma as we become into adults, and not passing it on to generation after generation.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
Um, I think the first thing is give yourself grace. Um, Not only give yourself grace, but you also have to give maybe your parents some grace. As I think you said, the kids today are dealing with things that we didn't have to deal with. And in the same fashion, we dealt with things that our parents didn't have any experience with. So, give some grace to yourself. And then I think, like Dr. Jen said as well, realize that the healing process is your responsibility, and you have to take some time to be honest and open in order to heal. And I'll pass it on.
Excellent point, my brother, and I will follow up with you on that. I love the fact that he mentioned grace, and also with that grace, um, it's complex, right? As we talk about the generational curses or the generational trauma, and how those things have evolved over the course of time, it's very complex. We all know we don't come from perfect families. We don't come from the most ideal and perfect situations. Crisis can come in all different forms of shapes and sizes. And so, what I would definitely say is, as we look to become more knowledgeable of how to avoid those risk factors, it requires us to educate ourselves, right? We gotta be mindful of how these dynamics have shifted within each generation. Just as you stated, Coach Rob, we've long gone from the days of just regular radio and regular telephones and rotary phones and phone booths. Now we're artificial intelligence, we're AI. Everything is coming at a rapid pace. Wi-Fi, all of this information, and all of it is literally making our youth grow up and getting introduced to things much faster and much sooner than their brains are capable of being able to process and understand. So one of the things that I would encourage our audience to be mindful of is continue to be mindful of one another, be mindful of yourselves, be mindful of your families, any children that you may have, godchildren, or those who you mentor, but to make sure that we continue to educate ourselves on what is existing out here, what are the trends, what's happening, what's occurring, so that in the event that these potential hurdles or risks show themselves, we'll know exactly how to deal with it, or we'll at least know the resources that can help us and provide the support to the individuals that we know and love most.
Thank you, Doc J.
And I'll say that it's okay to not be okay, but seek help. And seeking help means finding someone that can help you professionally, who can help you responsibly. There's someone out there who will connect with you and who cares and will be willing to get you to your best self. Your responsibility is to reclaim agency over your mental and physical health every single day. And you're important to this life.
All right. Well, thank you all for that. And as we wrap this up, we want to add a little seasoning to the soup. We want to make sure that we take these points away from today. Giving yourself grace, Trauma doesn't define you. Your healing is your responsibility. And be mindful of yourself and those around you. And I would like to also end this by letting you know that you are just enough as you are. Please understand that no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're dealing with, you are just enough. The things that you're going to face, you have been, if you look back at what you've came through and where you got to, please understand that you are just enough as you are. Please stay tuned as we're going to give a shout out to all of our sponsors, and we look forward to seeing you at the table again. Please don't forget the soup.
All right. Well, Coach Rob, thank you again for leading us through another fruitful conversation, an important one, and really underscoring the importance of recognizing the trauma that we may or may not have experienced as youth, but also underscoring that we are not a reflection of that. But we have those lived experiences, and we're not monoliths. But I want to make sure and encourage those to continue to get the help and the support that they need, and that you're not alone in this, and that you can continue to grow, give yourself grace, continue to protect your crown, protect your peace. And so I definitely appreciate you helping to lead and host this conversation with such a remarkable group with Jay Good and Dr. Jen.
So as we
All right.
wrap this up, thank you all from myself, the chef, the godson, Doc J, and the professor, Dr. Brother Keon. Thanks, y'all. We'll see you next time.
All right. And just like that, we're going to wrap up this episode. And we want to make sure that we leave this final message in that, as with everything with this podcast, it is intended for informational and educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, mental health, or counseling advice or any type of diagnosis or treatment. As always, the S.O.U.P encourages you to seek the guidance of a qualified healthcare provider or licensed counselor with any questions you may have regarding your physical or mental health. And as always, take care, protect your crown, protect your peace. We encourage all of our audience members to never disregard the professional advice that they're able to seek. And to all of our collaborative partners and sponsors, from the Union County NAACP to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Lifting As We Climb Charitable Foundation, the Spot, Deja's First Day of School, written by author Dr. Lashina Gaines, the State of Black Health Conference, Tap and Vine, MMIP, which means Match Made in Purpose. Of course, our brothers of the Delta Xi New Chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Shout out to the State of the Union Qs. And of course, our sisters of the Union County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Our own Coach Rob with his phenomenal book, Prayer, Patience, Progress. Anderson Outreach. And as always, to all of our audience members and to all of our supporters, make sure you tap in with us. Shoot us an email, leave us a comment, let us know your thoughts. And if you want to be a collaborative partner or a sponsor in the future, don't hesitate to reach out and pull up a seat to the table and enjoy the soup. Thank you all.